That was Tony Waterman there. Let's go ahead and bring in Song Zhang. He's the Washington bureau chief for the newspaper Shanghai Wen Hui Daily. And Song, the authors of these bills that Trump has signed, well, they've been trying to get these into law, passed in one form or another for about 2 years now, but many are linking it to the ongoing Hong Kong protests. Those weren't happening 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I don't know the details, but I think the Hong Kong Act has been passed and being signed by President Trump in a very bad time, because we just saw last week the district council election has been just finished, and I think the pro-democracy camp has won a lot of seats. And I think the Hong Kong Governor Lam has already shown she's ready for further compromise, and she's ready to set up an independent team to investigate all these riots. So I think it's a good time for the protesters and the Hong Kong government to have constructive dialogue. But this act has been passed, and I think this will send a very wrong signal to the protesters and to encourage them to continue this violence. I think this is a very bad idea, and President Trump, his signature has definitely drawn a lot of criticism from Beijing.
You're here in Washington. You cover a lot of what happens here in Washington. What do you make of the effort behind the bill? You said the timing was wrong, but it seemed that the president was facing some pressure to pass this. You had unanimous support in the Senate and all but one voting in favor in the House of Representatives.
Yes, I think President Trump, actually he has no other choice, because this is a veto-proof act. Even if he veto it, it will be again passed by the Congress. So it finally will become a law. I think the fundamental reason for those congressmen and senators to propose this act is to support the so-called democracy in Hong Kong. I think I can understand from Americans' perspective, but this act will finally not serve the fundamental interest. Not only it will kind of damage China's economic interest, it will also damage Hong Kong's economic interest, and even many U.S. companies will suffer from this kind of act. So I don't know what is the logic, because I've talked to a lot of scholars and experts in Washington. Most of them are against this act. So I don't know how this act can help those senators and congressmen to realize their purpose.
What do you expect from Beijing? We heard the initial response, and do you think this will ultimately affect things like the trade agreement over the trade war?
I don't think so. I think Beijing is very clear they don't like this act, and they don't like the fundamental attitude from Washington to these Hong Kong protests. But I think Beijing understands the relationship is becoming very, very complicated. I think Beijing is not ready to make trade negotiations and Hong Kong, this act, to be mixed together. And I think China has an interest to move ahead with these trade negotiations. And this Hong Kong issue, China will deal with it separately.
You've spent time here in the U.S. One of the criticisms has been how China and the Hong Kong regional government has handled the situation there. How do you think the U.S. would have handled it differently were it here?
And that's a very interesting question. I have talked to some very senior experts here on Hong Kong issue. One was telling me if this protests would have happened in Washington or New York in the last 4 or 5 months, hundreds of people might have been shot by the police in the last couple of months. But at the same time, I think America has its own political system, so the things might be dealt in a different way. Like the local, Congress will step inside, and there will be more pressure to compromise with the protesters. So I think things might be a little bit different here in Washington.
All right, Song Zhang, thank you so much for your insight and for joining us.
Thank you.